I caught my wife cheating at our baby's gender reveal party. You always think you know the people you love, the ones you take a bullet for. I thought I did. I was standing in my backyard, surrounded by 50 of our closest friends and family, all of them smiling, all of them waiting to see if my life would be painted pink or blue. In less than 10 minutes, I would find out it was painted a color I'd never seen before, the color of betrayal. And the artist was my own brother. The sun was a perfect golden orb hanging low in the sky, casting long, dancing shadows across the meticulously manicured lawn of our suburban home. It was the kind of idyllic afternoon that belongs in a catalog, a scene so picture-perfect it felt almost staged. Balloons in shades of pastel pink and baby blue were tethered to the fence posts, bobbing gently in the warm breeze. Long tables groaned under the weight of platters piled high with food, and a giant, unassuming white box sat on a pedestal near the center of it all, the vessel of our future's secret. This was it, the gender reveal party for our first child. My wife, radiant in a flowing white sundress that accentuated the beautiful, round curve of her belly, moved through the crowd with a grace that seemed to defy her advanced pregnancy. She was the picture of maternal bliss, her laughter ringing out like wind chimes, her hand frequently resting on her stomach as if to reassure the little one inside that all the world was good. I watched her, my heart swelling with a love so profound it was almost painful. We had been trying for years, navigating the soul-crushing landscape of fertility treatments and month after month of disappointment. This pregnancy was our miracle, our light at the end of a very long, dark tunnel. And today, we would share that light with everyone we held dear. My brother, my best man, my lifelong confidant, was by my side, clapping a firm hand on my shoulder. He was grinning, his eyes crinkling at the corners, a mirror of my own joy. He had been there through it all, the doctor's appointments, the tears of frustration, the moment we saw the positive test. He was as invested in this baby as anyone. Everything was perfect. Or so I thought. The first subtle crack in the porcelain veneer of the day appeared when my wife's phone, resting on the outdoor picnic table, buzzed. She picked it up, her smile never faltering as she typed out a quick reply. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time, I saw her glance at the screen, and for the briefest of moments, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. It wasn't annoyance or even simple distraction. It was guarded. A quick, darting look around before she tucked the phone back into her purse. I dismissed it. She was probably just coordinating with her mother about something. The day was too big, too important for me to get sidetracked by a paranoid thought. But the seed was planted. As the afternoon waned and the time for the main event drew near, I noticed her phone buzzed a third time. This time, she didn't pick it up. Instead, she excused herself from a conversation with my aunt, a hand pressed to her lower back. She told the group she was heading inside to use the restroom before the big moment. I watched her walk away, expecting her to disappear into the house, but she didn't. She veered left, towards the side of the garage, a path that led nowhere. My blood ran cold. Something was wrong. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, a frozen smile plastered on my face, my mind racing. The sounds of the party, the cheerful chatter, the clinking of glasses, the distant strains of pop music from a portable speaker faded into a dull, meaningless hum. All I could focus on was the empty space where my wife had just been. That path. It led to the garage's side door, the one we always kept locked, the one that opened onto a cluttered space filled with old tools, forgotten boxes, and the faint, persistent smell of gasoline and dust. There was no reason for her to go that way. The bathroom, the kitchen, the entire house was in the opposite direction. A cold knot of dread began to tighten in my stomach, a heavy, familiar feeling I hadn't experienced since our months of failed fertility tests. It was the feeling of something precious and fragile beginning to shatter. My brother, noticing my distraction, leaned over and asked if I was okay. I forced a nod, mumbled something about needing to grab the lighter for the smoke cannons from the kitchen, and started walking. Each step felt deliberate, heavy, as if I were wading through cement. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she needed something from the car. Maybe she was just getting a moment of quiet away from the crowd. But the guarded look on her face when she looked at her phone replayed in my mind. A silent, screaming alarm. I entered the house, the cool air a stark contrast to the warmth outside. I didn't go to the kitchen. I walked straight through the living room, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet, and headed for the door that led to the garage. My hand was trembling as I reached for the knob. It was unlocked. I pushed it open just a crack, the hinges groaning in protest. The garage was dim, lit only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. And then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the rustle of someone looking for a lost item in a box. It was a soft, muffled giggle. A woman's giggle. My wife's giggle. And it was followed by a low, murmuring response. A man's voice. My heart stopped beating. It wasn't my voice. I pushed the door open wider, my eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. And then I saw them. Standing between my car and my brother's motorcycle, locked in an embrace that was anything but platonic, were my wife and my brother. The world didn't just stop. It fractured into a million jagged pieces. The image was burned onto my retinas, a horrifying, high-definition photograph of my own personal apocalypse. Her hands, which I had held through countless doctor's appointments, were tangled in the hair of my little brother. His hands, the same hands that had helped me move into this very house, were splayed across the small of her back, pulling her closer. Their faces were inches apart, foreheads resting against each other, sharing a space and intimacy that had always been mine. They weren't just talking. I had stumbled into the final moments of a kiss, a secret, stolen moment that felt like an eternity. Time warped and stretched. I could see every detail. The way a strand of her hair had come loose and fallen across her cheek. The way his thumb was stroking her side. The soft, private smiles on their faces as they looked at each other. They were in their own world, a universe of two that had been secretly orbiting mine, and I had just crashed headlong into it. A roaring sound filled my ears, a deafening tidal wave of white noise that drowned out everything else. My body went numb, a pins and needles sensation starting in my fingertips and toes and creeping inward. I felt a surge of something hot and violent rise in my chest, a primal urge to scream, to smash something, to unleash the fury that was building inside me like a volcanic eruption. But I didn't. I was paralyzed, a ghost in my own life, witnessing an event so catastrophic that my brain refused to process it. Then, as if sensing my presence, she pulled back slightly, her head turning. Her eyes, the eyes I gazed into every night, found mine. The soft, private smile on her face evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. My brother followed her gaze, and when he saw me standing there, the color drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He was looking at me, but it was as if he was looking through me, at the ruin he had created. The three of us stood there for what felt like an eternity, a silent, frozen tableau of betrayal in the dim, dusty light of the garage. The muffled sounds of the party continuing just outside the walls seemed like a cruel joke. 50 people were celebrating our baby, our future, while in here, our present was being incinerated. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I simply turned around. My movements stiff and robotic, and walked away. I walked back through the house, back towards the sound of laughter and celebration, my mind a cold, clear slate. There would be no more secrets. There would be no more private smiles. The reveal was happening now. Walking back into that backyard was the longest, most surreal journey of my life. The golden sun now seemed mocking, its cheerful rays illuminating a scene that was about to be utterly destroyed. Every smiling face, every laughing child, every clinking beer bottle felt like a personal insult. My wife and my brother were behind me, their frantic whispered footsteps chasing me across the lawn. I could hear her sobbing my name, her voice thick with a panic that was too little, too late. I could hear him stammering, trying to form words that would never be enough. I ignored them. My focus was singular, a pinpoint of clarity in the chaos of my shattered reality. I reached the white box sitting on its pedestal. A hush fell over the crowd. They thought this was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. My mother beamed at me, her eyes shining with tears of joy. My father gave me a proud, reassuring nod. My wife's parents stood together, their arms linked, their faces alight with anticipation. They were all looking at me, expecting joy, expecting celebration, expecting me to pop the box and release a cloud of pink or blue smoke into the perfect evening air. My wife reached my side, her hand grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my skin. She was shaken, her face a mask of tear-streaked desperation. She was begging me with her eyes, shaking her head, mouthing no over and over again. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the woman I fell in love with. But the image was instantly replaced by the vision of her in the garage, and something inside me went cold and hard. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. I didn't push her, I just let go. Then I turned to face the crowd, my family, my friends. My eyes scanned their faces, taking in the love, the hope, the happiness that was about to be extinguished. I took a deep breath, the air catching in my throat. My voice, when it came, was not my own. It was calm, steady, and devoid of all emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I simply stated the facts. I told them that just moments before, I had walked into my garage. I told them what I had seen. I described the scene in detail, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard. I described my wife, the mother of my unborn child, in the arms of my own brother. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock so palpable it felt like a physical force. Faces fell, jaws dropped. The perfect picture was now a horrifying mess. My wife collapsed behind me in a wail of despair. My brother stood frozen, his face ashen, the life drained out of him. It was over. But as the initial shock began to settle, a new, even more horrifying question began to form in the silence. It was my mother who gave it a voice, her own trembling with a dawning, dreadful realization. Her eyes darted from my wife's sobbing form on the ground to my brother's catatonic stance, and finally to me. She looked at my wife's pregnant belly, and the question she asked hung in the air. A nuclear bomb dropped in the middle of the ruins of my life. My mother's question, whispered yet amplified in the deathly quiet of the yard, was a dagger twisted in an already gaping wound. The baby, is it yours? Her eyes weren't accusatory, not yet. They were filled with a dawning, soul-crushing horror, the kind that comes when a foundational truth you've always held is revealed to be a lie. The question wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about the very core of our family, about the 9 months of hope, about the little life we had all been celebrating. It reframed the entire tragedy, elevating it from a sordid affair to a potential deception of the highest order. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The crowd, which had been a tableau of shock, now became a hive of whispered murmurs and furtive glances. People looked at my wife, then at my brother, then back at me, their expressions a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and disgust. My wife's wailing intensified, a high, keening sound of pure agony. She tried to speak, to deny it, but the words were lost in a torrent of tears and incomprehensible sobs. Her denials, which might have held a sliver of credibility moments before, now sounded hollow and desperate in the face of such a fundamental question. Her silence, her inability to form a coherent defense, was an answer in itself. My father, a man who had always been my rock, my stoic and unwavering supporter, looked like he had been physically struck. His face, usually ruddy and full of life, was a sickly pale gray. He stared at my brother, his son, with an expression of profound, gut-wrenching disappointment that was far worse than any anger. The family unit, the thing I valued more than anything, was imploding in real time, right before my eyes.
And then my brother spoke. His voice was a dry, raspy thing, like sandpaper on wood. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He stared at the ground, at the perfectly green grass that now seemed to mock the ugliness of it all. He confessed. It wasn't just a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness. He admitted it had been going on for months. He described the stolen moments, the secret texts, the lies they had both woven to keep me in the dark. Each word was another hammer blow to the remnants of my life. He detailed how it had started, how they had gotten close during our struggles with infertility, how one thing had led to another. He painted a picture of a parallel life, a secret relationship that had flourished in the shadows of my own. As he spoke, the timeline of my pregnancy, the timeline of their betrayal, began to merge into a single horrifying possibility. The joy I had felt at the positive pregnancy test, the relief, the overwhelming love, it was all tainted now. The miracle I had cherished was potentially the product of the ultimate deception. The party was no longer a party. It was a crime scene, and the evidence was scattered across the faces of everyone I had ever loved. The confession hung in the air, a toxic cloud that poisoned everything it touched. There was nothing left to say. The perfect afternoon had curdled into a nightmare of epic proportions. The guests, our friends and family, were now unwilling witnesses to the most intimate and brutal of implosions. The awkwardness was a physical presence, a suffocating blanket that smothered the yard. People began to leave, not in a rush, but in a slow, somber procession. They offered me sympathetic glances, awkward pats on the shoulder, but I was beyond comfort. I was a hollowed-out shell, a spectator in my own ruin. My parents tried to talk to me, their voices laced with a pain that mirrored my own, but their words were just noise. I could see the devastation in their eyes, the way they looked at their two sons, one broken and the other the cause of the break. My wife was a crumpled heap on the grass, being attended to by her own horrified parents, who shot venomous looks at my brother before leading their weeping daughter away. The party decorations, the cheerful pink and blue balloons, now seemed like grotesque tombstones marking the death of my marriage and my family. The white box, still unopened on its pedestal, was the final, cruel joke. I didn't want to know the gender anymore. The mystery was the only thing left that hadn't been tainted. I had to get out. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the house, the yard that had been my sanctuary, now felt like a prison built of lies. I turned without a word to anyone and walked towards the driveway. My brother called my name, his voice cracking with a despair that I couldn't bring myself to care about. I didn't look back. I got into my car, the engine roaring to life with a violence that matched the storm raging inside me. I didn't have a destination. I just drove. I drove through the winding streets of our suburban town, a place that had always represented safety and community, but now felt alien and hostile. I drove for hours, the sun setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful sunset for a hideous day. My mind was a blank slate, a protective mechanism shutting down to prevent a complete overload. I wasn't thinking about the affair or the baby or the future. I was just driving, trying to outrun the image that was seared into my brain. Eventually, the car seemed to develop a mind of its own, turning onto a familiar street. I found myself parked outside my brother's apartment building. I had no idea why I was there. What did I expect to accomplish? A fight? A more detailed explanation that would somehow make it all better? There was no explanation that could undo this. But I sat there, the engine idling, staring up at the dark window of his apartment. I needed something, an ending, a beginning, something. I killed the engine, and the silence that rushed in was absolute. I sat in the darkness of my car, looking up at the third-floor window, a single, unwavering point of focus in the chaos of my mind. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a vast, empty landscape of sorrow. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. With a resolve that surprised me, I got out of the car and walked into the building. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was the longest of my life. I didn't knock. I just stood there for a moment, then raised my hand and banged on the door, 3 sharp, decisive raps. He opened it almost immediately, as if he had been expecting me. He looked even worse than he had at the party. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, his face a mask of grief and guilt. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let me in. We didn't fight, we didn't yell. We just sat in his sparsely furnished living room, 2 broken people in the wreckage of a shared history. He talked and I listened. He told me everything, every sordid, painful detail, not to excuse his actions, but as a form of penance. He laid his soul bare, and I absorbed it all with a numb acceptance. There were no more secrets, only the stark, ugly truth. When he was finished, a heavy silence settled between us. There was nothing left to say. I stood up and walked to the door. This was goodbye, not just for tonight, but for a long, long time. The relationship we had, the one I had cherished for 30 years, was dead. As I walked out of his apartment and back into the night, I felt a sliver of something new. It wasn't hope. It was too soon for that. It was clarity. The next few weeks were a blur of sterile, life-altering decisions. I met with a lawyer. I filed for divorce. I moved into a cheap, nondescript extended-stay hotel, a place with no memories and no future. The most difficult call was the one to a DNA testing service. I needed to know. I needed to rip the final, painful bandage off this wound. I don't know what the result will be. A part of me, a tiny, foolish piece of the man I used to be, still hopes the baby is mine. But a larger, more realistic part of me is preparing for the alternative. My life is not what I thought it was a week ago. It's a blank page, and the ink that will be used to write the next chapter is the color of uncertainty. But it will be my story. No more secrets, no more lies, just the hard, brutal truth, and whatever comes next. I will face it. I have to.